Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 2 versus Warhammer 3. Two of the biggest points of criticism with regards to Warhammer 2 versus Warhammer 3 is that Warhammer 2 had much better AI from the perspective of the community, and it was harder, whereas Warhammer 3 is a very easy game in comparison. I think the sentiment is accurate, though the reasoning behind it not necessarily as much. Let's talk about this. Is the AI better in Warhammer 2? Not by a long shot. If you see the AI behave in battle, how easy it is to, for instance, get your Legendary Lord to blob up all of its units so your ranged power can annihilate their entire army or significant portions of their army, is clearly not the case that the AI is better in battles. What about the AI being better on the campaign map? Well, you can look at this. This is turn 23. Mazdamundi over here has barely accomplished anything. Katep has basically lost multiple armies to a minor AI faction, which is still holding this particular settlement and likely will be holding it for a fairly long time considering the strength of the garrison that they do have over there. The build order the AI has, the decision making the AI has, like Terranok marching an army all the way through my territory over here. Sure, they'll raid and destroy one of my territories, like I imagine Hack Hall is going to fall very shortly over here. But that doesn't mean that the AI is somehow competent. Rather, something else is going on in Warhammer 2 that makes it overall a more difficult experience to deal with on the campaign map. And this applies to both Vortex and Mortal Empires. Though certainly the Vortex campaign map is the one that's going to be quite brutal in a lot of ways, and certainly a slower campaign than anything you might see in either Realms of Chaos or Immortal Empires. So what is going on? Well, one of the things to talk about with Warhammer 2, be Immortal Empires, but especially the Vortex, is the distance between settlements. So you look at Morafi's starting situation here. You have Iron Picks. Now this is a province with 4 settlements in Immortal Empires, but the distance between settlements is very small. Like you can easily traverse this entire province in Immortal Empire in like 2 turns at most. Whereas in here, it would take me easily 3 turns, so you have greater distances between settlements. Now, this contributes to the difficulty aspect of the game because it means you may have opponents just marching through your territory. You might not even see them marching through your territory, which, by the way, is one thing to mention. Is like you don't have the same kind of line of sight that you do have in Warhammer 3, so you can't necessarily detect what enemies are doing. That is actually quite an important factor to take into consideration, the way the terrain works. And I have to mention this, Warhammer 2's Vortex map had a lot of the settlements spread apart one from another. You had great distances to cover on the campaign map. In Mortal Empires, they reduced this. And if you look at Realms of Chaos, I would say that the distance between settlements and the overall size of the campaign map, you could compare Realms of Chaos to Mortal Empires. But then you have to compare Mortal Empires to Immortal Empires, and you see a significant reduction in the distance that you have to cover between different settlements on the campaign map. Now, this is a problem for a couple of reasons from a difficulty standpoint. One, it pins the AI in place and makes it easier to defend your territory. You don't have nasty surprises like the one I'm about to encounter here, right? Because, yeah, I used Huggle War to just show the campaign map, but I didn't know where this army had disappeared. I knew it was here somewhere, but I didn't know where it had disappeared. So you had a very different campaign dynamic, be it the Vortex and Mortal Empires, compared to Immortal Empires in particular. And it is a disappointment, I have to argue, that when you're looking at the difference between the campaign maps in Warhammer 2 versus Warhammer 3, and you see how crushed everything is in Warhammer 3 and Mortal Empires compared to Warhammer 2, like Vortex especially, but also Mortal Empires, then that does affect the flow of gameplay. It pushes you towards more settlement battles. It makes it far more annoying because you're constantly dealing with garrisons. The garrison battles are not great. By the way, the auto-resolve is also not as good in Warhammer 3 as it was in Warhammer 2. like, what is the purpose of the auto-resolve? Let me talk about this, because I harp on about the auto-resolve, but here's my perspective. I think the auto-resolve in a game should push you towards fighting the meaningful battles while avoiding the meaningless battles. So, like, I don't care about fighting garrisons, I care about fighting the big-ticket battles in a campaign. That's what I think is important, and that's what the priority should be there. But in Warhammer 3, that's exactly the opposite. The battles that you fight, for the most part, are garrison battles to reduce your casualties, not because they're interesting, but just to significantly reduce the casualties. And you actually end up auto-resolving major opponents because, well, you can, and you might take significant casualties if you fight that battle manually. And you will take significant casualties on auto-resolve, but if you encounter an army on the campaign map, you'll actually take significantly less losses auto-resolving that than you would in, say, a settlement. Even a minor settlement if it has a strong enough garrison, if it has the garrison building. So the dynamic of the campaign is quite different in Warhammer 2 versus Warhammer 3. And by the way, the dynamic of the campaign, the distances between settlements and all that, that's also very similar in Warhammer 2 to what it was in Warhammer 3. It reminds me of what Mandalore Gaming said, that Creative Assembly was really focused on breaking away from what they had done previously. Now, there were certainly success stories with respect to that. The change to the melee meta, the change in difficulty, I think, like, the way Creative Assembly decided to handle difficulty, that was better. But we certainly did end up losing quite a bit as well. Also, I have to say the campaign map of Warhammer 2 has a lot of charm to it. Like, you have, like, ruins, and you can explore ruins, and there's a puzzle there, and you have the ogre camps, and you can actually get ogre mercenaries, which we probably aren't going to get anytime soon in Warhammer 3, given the way things are working. So, there are certainly a lot of fun systems in Warhammer 2, and granted, look, Warhammer 2 was not great at launch, but you do expect a game to improve like this, and you do expect the successor to this game to be an improvement. Say what you will about Warhammer 2, I think is universally agreed that it was an improvement to Warhammer 1 in virtually every way that matters, especially when we look at the end state of Warhammer 2 versus the end state of Warhammer 1. But with Warhammer 3, I think they were focused on trying to break away from the things they had done previously, and you can also see that Realms of Chaos is a disaster of a map. Like, just the design of the map alone is not great. The design of the factions on the map, the overall campaign objectives, like, it is impressive to think of the fact that the Vortex campaign is something to be appreciated right now compared to the Rift campaign, the Rifts in Warhammer 3. And mind you, a lot of people dislike, for obvious reasons, the Vortex campaign, the ritual situation that you have to engage in on this campaign map. But there's certainly a lot of fun to be had. There are some campaigns easier than others. Another thing to mention about Warhammer 2 is with respect to how they decide to design different campaigns. So in Warhammer 3, they seem to have focused a lot on balancing things out. Like, every lord, every campaign, everyone has to be balanced, everyone has to have a fair chance. Whereas in Warhammer 2, some campaigns are substantially harder than others. Like, Morafi's campaign is substantially harder than Malekith's. You don't have trading partners, you don't have allies, you have a difficult campaign situation surrounded by foes, from the Sisters to Katep to Tarax to the High Elves, all gunning for you. So this makes the campaign difficult. Like, I think when I talk about difficulty, a lot of people misunderstand what I'm talking about. And when I rank Legendary Lords, I don't want all Legendary Lords to be the same. In point of fact, I would very much appreciate having a hard campaign. But having a hard campaign is not about having crappy mechanics and calling that hard. Having a hard campaign is maybe a campaign like this, where you're just surrounded by foes and have to kind of deal with it. It did end up being pretty bad if you're looking at a campaign as Emmerich. Like, Emmeric's campaign was insufferable in Warhammer 2, in both Vortex and especially Immortal Empires. But I do think that diversity of different campaigns and difficulties and styles, like Morafi's campaign plays vastly different than Malekith's campaign, for instance. And it can be quite an experience to go through her campaign, dealing with all of the issues that she does have to deal with. Another thing that, by the way, adds to the charm of the Warhammer 2 map, yeah, the rogue armies. Like, the rogue armies still exist in Warhammer 3, but that's like, you're not going to encounter a rogue army. You're highly unlikely to encounter a rogue army as early as I have over here, for instance. So there's a lot of like less random events like that happening. There's a lot of less surprises that are happening, and I think the campaign overall, it just ends up feeling far less dynamic in Warhammer 3 than Warhammer 2. Now, what about difficulty? The AI is not smart. It's very stupid. It does a bunch of mistakes. So why is it considered that the AI is better in Warhammer 2 than Warhammer 3? Because the AI in Warhammer 2 gets significantly higher benefits than it does in Warhammer 3. Also add to that the overall campaign design, the map design, etc. And that all benefits the AI, because like the AI over here can take these two settlements over here in the situation, and yeah, I kind of goofed up over here in this situation playing as Marafi. Though I'm glad for it. Like, I'm glad to see the AI actually, you know, to see that the campaign mechanics create situations where the AI can get the jump on me. The problem, however, is how they also decide to increase difficulty on Legendary. This is on Legendary very hard. This is the difficulty that I make all my videos for in both Warhammer 3 and other Total War games. Now, if I look at the campaign settings, Legendary very hard. So here's what happens. Here's why the AI is quote-unquote harder to deal with in Warhammer 2 than Warhammer 3. It cheats a heck of a lot more. So this is turn 23. This army under Shakira, let's go with that. This army under Shakira has gold ranked units. Do you know how many battles this army has fought? 0. She's rank 5, she's gold ranked units, and if we look at Terranok over here, we can see that all of the settlements in Terranok are tier 3 settlements. And it's not like the AI is generating so much more money. No, they get significant cheats. Cheats in cost reductions, cheats in upkeep, cheats in growth, cheats in construction time even, I think, that they have. So the AI is blatantly cheating in Warhammer in Warhammer 2 in a way that doesn't cheat in Warhammer 3. Now, I did greatly appreciate the fact that Creative Assembly toned this crap down. They reduced the melee benefits, they nerfed range in Warhammer 3, though I think they may have gone a bit too far, because like you look at Dark Shards in Warhammer 2 compared to Warhammer 3, yeah, Dark Shards are an insanely powerful unit in this. They will annihilate many other units. But I do certainly appreciate the change to the melee meta that we currently have in Warhammer 3 versus Warhammer 2. So I do appreciate the overall design difficulty. However, although the AI is actually better and more aggressive in Warhammer 3, people talk like, oh, the AI is more aggressive in Warhammer 2. It is not more aggressive. It's extremely passive in Warhammer 2. It will spend many, many turns doing very, very little. Like, look at Tyrion's situation over here. He's captured his initial province. He's taken... He's marching on Calador over there, and I imagine he's going to lay it to siege. But basically, Tyrion in this entire campaign, he's basically taken 4 settlements. Beyond the one that he starts with, in 23 turns. Alariel has accomplished very little as well, though she has certainly taken the Phoenix Gate. Whereas if you look at Warhammer 3, if you play on Legendary very hard in Warhammer 3, even though you're going to have to fight a lot more battles, believe it or not, manually in Warhammer 3 on Legendary very hard than you will in Warhammer 2. Yes, surprisingly so. That is actually going to be the case, because the garrisons have a significant auto-resolve benefit. In Warhammer 3 specifically, the AI doesn't accomplish as much. This applies to both Mortal Empires and the Vortex campaign. It just cheats. It cheats on the ritual, it cheats on growth, cheats on upkeep, cheats on experience, you name it. It is not a better AI. The reason it's more difficult is because they just keep spawning these infinite armies. They have Dyson spheres, all of them. Like the AI in general has Dyson spheres to support each other, and there's the issue as I see it. Like the AI just blatantly cheats in Warhammer 3 versus Warhammer. The AI blatantly cheats in Warhammer 2 versus Warhammer 3, and that isn't a great situation to have to deal with on in a campaign, as I personally see it. So they toned down the cheats. They removed some of the unique and exciting elements in a campaign, or the more dynamic elements in a campaign, and it really focused on optimizing the fun out of the game, if you will. That's how I would describe Warhammer 3 compared to Warhammer 2. Like, for all the limited limited campaign mechanics that we have in Warhammer 2 versus 3, like in terms of diplomacy and all that kind of stuff, there's something certainly to be appreciated about Warhammer 1 and 2 compared to Warhammer 3. Like, the campaign just feels like it's a more joyful experience to go for the campaign of Warhammer 2, even in something like the Vortex campaign, which was certainly much maligned when it came out. But I think we just didn't know what we were going to be in store for. So things did not necessarily improve in Warhammer 3 versus Warhammer 2 as we would have wanted. And I think that's the biggest disappointment with it. It is harder because of the various cheats the AI has, but it's not necessarily better designed. The AI is certainly not better designed. It's worse in battle, it's worse on the campaign map. It just cheats far more. Cosine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.